Hi, I'm Bill Merrell, and I'm back with you again to, in fact, discuss things that they usually don't teach you, all right? This is a subject that I found, having 5 kids of my own, that there's a void. And one of the teachers that I've talked to one time said they really didn't have enough time to actually go into other things other than the subjects under the different laws and things that they have the requirement to teach. So, in fact, we will, talk today about different things. One is a little bit of discussion first of our local language, Pittsburghese. Pittsburghese is, in fact, a language all by itself. It's a language that's used locally. The vernacular has been built based on all the different types of ethnic backgrounds that came into the Pittsburgh area. German, Polish, Italian, French. They all had a little play in it, especially as the Amish did. Words like Yuns, downtown, Washington, and East Liberty are all things that other people laugh at. We laugh at ourselves too, but that's all right. Many of the problems that we have is the fact that where did these things come from? You know, we talk about it all the time. We say the words all the time. I'm working out of town, and whenever I'm watching a Steeler game, I'm listening to the announcers talk about Yuns going there or somebody being from East Liberty. And the people that I'm watching the game with question, what's that? You know, and so like I said, it's a little joy and part of the tradition of the Southwest Pennsylvania area. Some of the things that we have, some of the local sayings that we have, like red up your room. If you go to New York, they have no clue what you're talking about. If you're going to get some pop or gum band or things like that, once again, these are issues that we have locally, but in fact, you know, outside of the area, they have a pretty good idea, but we know what it means. The other area that we've always talked about is the things that your parents say to you as you're growing up. Those things, in fact, help us grow to the people we are. By that I mean if, in fact, your parents tell you to red up your room, for example, and if they keep telling you that every day, you promise yourself as you're a child that, in fact, when you become a parent, you will never, ever say that to your kids. Something, one of the other areas, like, I'll give you something to cry about. These comments are made by parents all the time because of the fact that they're trying to get a point across. As you become an adult and have your own children, then you, in fact, promise yourself, like I said, that you'll never say these things. And the first time you say them, all of a sudden it's like this little bubble comes out of your mouth like a comic strip. And in fact, you see it hanging out there, and at that point, you just want to smack yourself because of the fact, once again, all those years of growing up, 18 years of hearing this, promising everybody you would never say it, then all of a sudden it comes to fruition. What we're going to talk about today is old sayings. Where did they come from? And at last, we're going to be talking about statues. What do they tell us? All right, this is going to be a fun show, and I think that it's going to be something that we'll all learn from. A lot of these things that make sense to us today, in fact, have made sense for hundreds of years. So we're going to talk about that. The first thing we're going to do is dead ringer. What does dead ringer mean? Okay. You hear it in sports, you know, he's a dead ringer for somebody, or they brought in a dead ringer. Well, the term came up early in England when, in fact, a horse person would have 2 horses that look very similar. They would have a fast one and a slow one. The fast one would, in fact, be used in the process of building up the odds for a horse race. And then at the time of the big race, when the odds are totally against their horse, or raising the odds for their horse because it's a slow horse, then they would pull the other horse into the race and, in fact, let them win, making themselves a lot of money. So that was one of the terms for the dead ringer. It's one of those things that we use today, but many people don't understand where the tradition came from. The second one we're going to look at is barking up the wrong tree. We've heard this before. Once again, it comes from the Old English, whenever, in fact, fox hunts were being used, and, in fact, the dogs trying to track the fox would, in fact, get the scent of something, and they would go, instead of barking at the tree or at the area where the fox was, they would pull the full hunt to a different area and, in fact, screw up the hunt itself. So that's what they call barking up the wrong tree. The third one, and this is sort of a more complicated one you'll see on the screen here in a second. There's 3 that we will talk about. A flash in the pan. All right, the first one about a flash in the pan. An example of this would be Ross Perot's political career turned out to be a flash in the pan. All right, what that means is something that shows great promise then disappoints by being over too quickly. The flintlock musket that you see on the screen there, all right, have small pans, and I'll come over to it. It's this area where you see the arrow. It has a small pan, and it holds gunpowder as part of the fuse, and part of that gunpowder would in fact be placed there to help the flint knock into and cause a spark, which would cause the charge in the muzzle to in fact fire up again. Okay, can we go back to that slide again, please? Okay, and you see the half-cocked, going off half-cocked is actually the term that we're going to be looking at here for a second. Before you go in half-cocked demanding a raise, you better think of what you're going to say. That's an example of how it could be used. Once again, the cocking device that you see here on the musket, in fact, would be held in this position half-cocked to allow a person who's going to use it easy access to the flint area. All right, so if the hammer would drop at that point, then in fact the gun wouldn't have enough power to make the spark. So therefore, the phrase going off half-cocked allowed that hammer to be in a position where in fact you would have access to put your flint or your device as the time went on that already carried the small amount of charge that you need, but the pressure coming down would not in fact allow the charge to go off, causing the spark to in fact explode the powder that was in here projecting the ball. And the last one, if you can keep this up for a second, is loaded for bear. Okay, once again, and I only say this because of the fact that the type of musket that we're using here. The president, an example of this, the president's opponents are typically loaded for bear, waiting for missteps in office. Clinton provided many opportunities to load up. Okay, the musket that you see would, in fact, the type of animal that you'd be going after, you could, in fact, load with more powder. Okay, the powder, in fact, would depend upon the charge of the animal you're going after. So if you're going after a squirrel, you would need a small charge. If you're going after a deer, a larger charge. And if you're going after the biggest animal, a bear, you would need the largest charge. So loaded for bear means that you'd be going with everything you had, the maximum capacity of your weapon. All right, the next slide. Loose cannon. What is a loose cannon? We hear this term all the time. The typical engineer is too honest for his own good. They can be like a loose cannon around customers because they're always trying to explain things to the maximum depth. The loose cannon term came from the old sailing ships, what they call the capital ships, back during the British whenever they ruled the seas. And the loose cannon would be very, very large, heavy cannons that would be on the deck. And in rough seas, they would in fact then break loose. A loose cannon rolling around the deck could damage everything. It could actually cause the ship to sink because if it fell through down to the hold areas where they actually held animals and things, it actually had the weight and the power to in fact go right through the bottom of the ship. So when we're talking about loose cannons, it's something that needed to be tied down, something that needed to be watched, something that needed to be secured to no end. I mean, this was one of probably the worst things on these kind of vessels. The next topic we'll be talking about, biting the bullet. An example of this, if you want to clear those 8 tickets off your driving record, you will need to bite the bullet and pay the fines. Okay, that is a common term used today, but in fact we don't have the opportunity to necessarily get that same meaning whenever the term was started. As you see on the screen, bite the bullet. You see a picture of a bullet picked up from Gettysburg after the Gettysburg battle. All right, that battle, in fact, caused thousands of injuries. And because of the fact that it caused thousands of injuries, they did not have enough anesthetic to, in fact, stop the pain for the people. So they, in fact, had to use different items. In this case, they would use an item that had a opportunity to in fact give a little bit so they wouldn't be breaking their teeth trying to get through the pain. They would put a bullet in between their teeth and in fact then have the opportunity to bite down, giving them something to be chewing on, a piece of wood, or in this case a bullet that in fact would take up some of the pressure off of their teeth. The next area we're going to talk about, once again, and these are going through quite rapidly because there are a lot of them, okay? You've heard them every day of your life, but maybe didn't know the real meanings of them. Bought the farm. The next term we're going to talk about, bought the farm, and it has the meaning today of to die, okay? For example, Oscar's bungee jumping experience came to an abrupt halt whenever he bought the farm on his first try. Well, if you don't know what that means, that doesn't make a lot of sense, okay? It comes from the old World War II death benefit that soldiers would get whenever they, in fact, came back from combat, or didn't come back from combat, live at least. Their families would receive a death benefit that amounted to just enough money to, in fact, purchase a small tract of land, usually in the Midwest in the farm country. So this is where that term, in fact, came bought the farm. Okay, the next one we'll talk before our break, called on the carpet. Okay, this is never usually a good thing. And once again, like many of these statements, they've come from the military. And called on the carpet means usually at that time, whenever it became usable, was a time whenever, in fact, the officers, the high-ranking officers in the military were the only ones who actually had carpet in their offices. So whenever you were, in fact, called on the carpet, you were, in fact, called on there to report to them for something that, in fact, happened. So therefore, like I said, that's usually not a good thing. And today, whenever you're called on the carpet to the principal's office or to where, that's not a good thing. So we're going to take a small commercial break here, and we will be back shortly.
Healthy teeth are key to a healthy body. If you have heart valve problems or diabetes, you should take extra care of your teeth. For those with heart valve problems, there's an added risk during dental treatment as bleeding can occur. This may result in bacteria from the mouth reaching the heart through the bloodstream, causing bacterial endocarditis, a serious inflammation of the heart tissue. If you have diabetes, you may be more prone to periodontal disease. Also, diabetes can slow the healing process, which lowers the body's resistance to infection. Providing your dentist with your current health history will help your dentist recommend the best treatment available for your specific needs. By taking care of your teeth and gums and visiting your dentist regularly, you can help prevent infection and stay healthy. For the ADA Dental Minute, I'm Dr. Maria Lopez-Howell.
Is she thirsty or diabetic? Is he tired or arthritic? Subtle behavioral changes can be early signs of disease in pets. These changes are often less obvious in cats, which can be better than dogs at hiding illness. But a wellness exam from your veterinarian twice a year can help detect, treat, or prevent many health problems before they become serious. So call your veterinarian and schedule your pet's wellness exam today.
Your influence, your concern, your rules can help keep minors away from alcohol. Visit don'tletminersdrink.com.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our program, and this next segment starts with the statement, the whole 9 yards. An example of that would be, my new car has air conditioning, power windows, power locks, and the whole 9 yards. There's a couple different areas that this statement has supposedly come from. The one that I find most often, once again, was based on the military. In World War II, the Corsair fighter had a gun belt that was approximately 27 feet long. which in fact was 9 yards. So whenever the fighter pilots would come down and they say that they gave the whole 9 yards, that meant that in fact they were going to in fact give everything that they had, and that's the thing that they had today, is the fact that if you give the whole 9 yards, that's the meaning of it, that you gave everything you had, you didn't leave anything. The next one's it's interesting too. In the doldrums, the doldrums is actually a place in the Caribbean that is located near the equator. And what it does is, in fact, it has a very unstable trade wind. So whenever you see the picture, you can't go anywhere, you know, especially if you had a sailing ship. And so whenever someone said you're stuck in the doldrums, that means that you're just sort of sitting there watching the world go by because of the fact that there's really nothing you could do about it. The next area would be show your true colors. Once again, this is interesting because, once again, it's a military term used back whenever the Spanish and the French and the British were all fighting for the same thing, property. And whenever they would come over to search for gold, or Aztecs or Indians, and that would be involved, but the ships coming back and forth carrying the gold back and forth to Europe would in fact, depending upon the ship that they were coming up on, would show the colors possibly of that country. And then, in fact, whenever they got close enough, they'd run up their own colors, and showing their true colors were, in fact, demonstrating what country they were from. There's a couple good movies that demonstrate this, and in fact, that they've been on recently. The Pirates of the Caribbean is one of probably the closest ones that I can imagine. Armed to the teeth. All right, that's an area that we're going to look at. We hear about this all the time, and armed to the teeth is very simple. When we talk about the Pirates of the Caribbean, being the movie that we see, all the weapons that they had only had one shot. So these people would have 6 and 7 weapons on them at any given time, and they wouldn't have any space, any place to put anymore. So in fact, they'd end up sticking their knife in their teeth. That meant that they in fact had everything covered. They had their boots with weapons, they had their pants belt with weapon, they had their pockets with weapons, they had weapons under their shirts, and in fact the last place that they could handle it would be in their teeth. And that's exactly what it is. The pirate phrase originated in Port Royal in Jamaica, having only one shot black powder weapons and cutlasses. They in fact used this term, armed to the teeth, to say that they were completely filled with all the weapons they could possibly handle. The next one, holding your feet to the fire. You see the little picture here, Shakespeare in Love. Okay, this movie starts off with a demonstration of this activity. And the demonstration is whenever people wanted to try to get the truth or get a confession out of somebody, they would literally put their feet next to a raging fire and keep getting them closer, or put their feet into the fire and get a confession. So that's, for example, of that would be, you made a fair bet with me on the Super Bowl, and I'm going to hold your feet to the fire for the payment. Okay, so this is, once again, this is just one of those issues that in fact come up once in a while. We don't hear it a lot, but it's out there. The next one is mind your P's and Q's. All right, if I ask probably most of the students in the school, they wouldn't know what that has to do with. It has pints and quarts. Yes, it's a drinking situation. And before they could really have true measurement, a pint would in fact come up to the halfway in your forearm. A quart would in fact come up whenever your arm was totally bent. So the people who were running the taverns and things back then would tell their customers to mind your P's and Q's to make sure you didn't get drunk, and in fact give you the opportunity not to get too carried away and control your money and things like that. Face the music. All right, once again, a lot of these terms were based on the military, and the reason for that is whenever you come back from the military, there could be hundreds of thousands of people coming back, and these terms that are used in the military are brought back to all areas of the country. To accept the truth is the basis of to face the music. Example of that, it's time to face the music on your donut addiction. Okay, if you're eating one every 5 minutes, you might have a problem. This comes from the old British military when someone was court-martialed. There would be a military drum band being played, and they would be forced to face that group to, in fact, hear their sentence. So it came, in fact, from the British years and years ago. Okay, the next one doesn't really come directly from the military, but what it is paint your town red. Paint the town red. We look at that today as being a celebration and things like this. Whenever the Super Bowl victories in Pittsburgh, you'll hear announcers talk about people are painting the town red tonight. Well, what had happened, actually it was based on, is the fact that whenever the Roman Empire would take over a country or a city, the Roman soldiers would then kill the people that they took over, get their blood, and paint the town with their blood. And they would be drunk whenever they were doing it, so it was supposed to be exuberant, and they would in fact be doing their thing. Okay? Pull out all the stops. Okay? That means basically take every effort to get the advantage. All right, and we have an organ on the screen, and the organ in fact gives you the opportunity, because the stops in the organ mean when in fact they wanted to turn up the volume of the organ, they would pull out the stops, and the stops were that stop the air from flowing through the pipes, limiting the volume. Well, if you pull out all the stops, then you have a massive amount of pressure going through there, and so the noise was much louder, or the music was much louder as it was. Raining cats and dogs, okay? This is interesting because of the fact we use that in the common vernacular now. For example, we decided to cancel our trips because it was raining cats and dogs that day. Raining cats and dogs comes from the time of the plague in London, mostly, because of the fact of their drainage system wasn't like it was today. It didn't, in fact, allow for water and things to be taken away. Everything came down the street. And when they had severe rains, in fact, during the time of the plague, it wasn't only the people that were affected by the plague, it were the animals too, because they would be eating these rodents and things that were around because there was not a lot of food. They would also be dead. So when in fact it came down to raining cats and dogs, the rain were bringing out all the carcasses that were left over, bringing them into the streets. It was washing them into the streets. So whenever they walked out, all these cats and dogs would be laying all over the place. So, not necessarily the easiest thing, but that did in fact happen. Chink in the armor. All right. When we talk about it today, it's a flaw or a problem that prevents success. For example, that this plan about retiring early has just one chink in the armor, we have no money. That would be a problem. Chink is an obscure word meaning a slit or a fissure in the armor that in fact which would leave someone vulnerable. All right, once again, there are a bunch of different movies that are out to demonstrate how the armor in fact is worn and what they have to do whenever in fact they get replaced. The next term we're going to look at is really used incorrectly most of the time. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. We always think that this is sort of a blessing from God based on the idea that they're going to protect the weather and everything else and it won't rain. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Lord willing, certainly. They're asking for some guidance and some help. An example of how it's done today is, I don't think you're a good driver, but Lord willing and the creek don't rise, and you just might pass the license test. With good luck and no major problems, the success can be there. But the creek that they're talking about isn't the creek with water, okay? It's the Creek Nation, the Indian Nation, that if you look at the slide, again, you'll see that the Indian Nation that we're talking about took from Tennessee down to western Florida, all right? And during the expansion of the American population westward, the Creek Nation was probably one of the they had about 6 or 7 tribes with them, and in fact they had a lot of control, and in fact very militarily meant that in fact if you had a problem, it was probably going to be with them. So creek don't rise does not mean water, it means the Indian Nation itself. Okay, one of the next ones we have, cut the mustard. Okay, cut the mustard is to meet expectations. For an example of this would be Cadillac's days as a high-status car could have been over. All right, compared to modern cars, it just doesn't cut the mustard. Now, that's not necessarily a true statement. It's an example of what we're talking about. Mustard in this case is actually mispronounced. It's not mustard, it's muster. Once again, being a military situation, the mustard that you see on the screen is in fact a group of people standing, and they are there to meet a standard. That standard is in fact in books that tells how to wear the uniform, how they're supposed to look, how their hair is supposed to be cut, and things like that. So whenever you cut the mustard, if you cut the mustard, then in fact you meet all the requirements you're supposed to. Okay. Some other things we're going to look at here today, which I think are real interesting. Blackballed. What does blackballed mean? Okay. Whenever you in fact have a situation, for example, you have a club, an association that in fact has some sort of secret voting. Most times you're given two balls, a white ball and a black ball. And in fact, you saw the slide that demonstrated that these balls, in fact, when you slide them in there, you can't tell which ones are in there. And then whenever the people in charge of the club, for example, if you were voting on a new member, for example, everybody would be given a white and a black one. They would hold one in each hand. People who are running the operation wouldn't know exactly which one's which. You put it in the box, you walk out, they open up the box. If they see a black ball, the individual doesn't get membership. Okay, this is what it means by being blackballed. This was, in some of the better known, more secretive operations or organizations in the past have in fact used this kind of a situation to take place. Now we're going to go into the second portion here at the end of the program. We're going to talk about what statutes tell us. Okay, when you're looking at a statue for example, I'm going to be talking today of the statues that you see maybe at Gettysburg. The one you see on the screen right now is Traveler. That is the horse owned by General Robert E. Lee. Okay, Robert E. Lee, in fact, was probably one of the more interesting and more beloved generals of this military's ever had, this country's ever had. But what does this statue tell us? Okay, the statute tells us specifically one thing. One is the general was not wounded. He did not, in fact, get killed. And he, in fact, was alive after the war ended. All right, and we know that because of the 4 feet of the horse are on the ground. All right, this is something that, once again, something that people usually don't tell us. The second statue here is General Hancock. General Hancock was a Union general. If you watch the movie of Gettysburg, he is the one who defends whenever Pickett's charge up the middle of Gettysburg. General Hancock's soldiers are, in fact, at that location. As you saw the movie, General Hancock gets shot in that, and that horse demonstrates that by having 1 foot off the ground. 1 foot means that the individual, in fact, was wounded in battle. General Hancock, in fact, lived through that, and he, in fact, ran for president years following the Civil War. The next one we see is General John Reynolds. He was the commander of the Union forces in the Gettysburg area. He, in fact, got killed during that battle, and once again, the example of his horse tells us that. With 2 feet off the ground, and in the pose that every general would like to be alive at the end to see their horse like that because it looks very romantic. But in fact, he was killed during a battle and did not have the opportunity to in fact see his own. General Stonewall Jackson is an interesting situation when we're talking about statues. He died from complications from wounds, but if you see his horse here, all 4 feet are on the ground. Why would that be? Well, it is because General Stonewall Jackson was killed by his own troops. It was accidental, so therefore it was not considered an enemy conflict, even though it was done during the Gettysburg battle. So in fact, there's a whole bunch of things here, like I said, that we can learn just by looking at statues. So whenever you go around the area, take a peek at it. The rule of thumb is one, we're going to go back real fast. Rule of thumb is that item that, in fact, in British law, allowed a man to beat his wife with a stick that was smaller than the thickness of his thumb. I hear the music. Program is now coming to an end. I want to thank you very much for visiting. Look forward to talking to you soon. Oh, sure. This is for the yearbook.